Okay, so let's do a review here of Cheeseborough's important article, Business Model Innovations, Opportunities, and Barriers from 2009. Technology is worthless. Okay? He doesn't say that. I say that. He doesn't say that exactly. But what he does say is that technology itself has no single objective value. The economic value of technology remains latent until it's commercialized in some way via a business model. Okay? And further, he goes to say that unless a suitable business model is found, these technologies will yield less value than they would otherwise. So it's important that, again, if you create technology just for technology's sake, and I said this before, it will end up in the technology museum. Okay, and I also say that you'll end up in the poorhouse. The purpose of creating technology is to solve a problem, add value. And in fact, if it doesn't do those things, if it's not commercialized in any sort of way, then it's more of like a piece of art per se. Now, I'm not saying that art does not create value, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. This is an interesting article as well because Cheeseborough spent many, many years at Xerox and understanding Xerox, and in part that's how he rose to fame. And I thought that this was a very interesting point here, that the revenue model that Xerox had, okay, especially through the 70s, drove its R&D process. And it drove its R&D process to produce high-volume machines, maximum uptime, and high availability. Because they had this Gillette model, this razor blade model, where they were making big money on the consumables, especially toner and paper, okay, that drove R&D to produce machines that ate toner and paper through volume and uptime and that sort of thing. So when they in Palo Alto, when they were doing all of this industrial research out there at PARC, which is again the Palo Alto Research Center, okay, they had a challenge. Now remember, PARC is they created so much of what we use in our everyday life. They created out there. They created the graphic user interface. They created the mouse. They created, although Swedes would argue with that one. They created Ethernet. They created so much that we take for granted today. They created so much that that Steve Jobs went out and stole, actually. Well, in large part because Xerox didn't have a way to do anything with it. It didn't fit their current business model. It didn't fit their current business model, and that was a problem. He says that companies have at least as much to gain from developing innovative business models than developing innovative technologies. Again, there's got to be a link. If you just focus on technology, you got to link it. You got to link it with a business model. Now, 3Com, huge company. This was just one of the spin-offs from Xerox. So this guy, Robert Metcalf, who had been involved in the development of Ethernet, okay, leased Ethernet technology for $1,000 from Xerox. Now, looking back, that's an unbelievable deal. But he didn't know really how to make money with it either. I mean, he was going to try to build a network of salespeople to try to sell it in the same fashion that Xerox was selling its copiers. So it's kind of funny that he was going to fall in that same sort of trap. But then he started teaming up with some other companies, and they started producing local area networks and trying to standardize Ethernet technology and LAN technology and that sort of stuff. And he just happened to hit it right at the right time where the PC and personal computers and whatnot came in. But he was experimenting with his business model, whether it was going to be the sales staff, or was he just going to focus on Unix technology, okay? Or he and his wife were just putting together a directory of local area network dealers and resellers and selling that for $125 a copy. So it wasn't really clear what he was going to do. It was this experimentation that led him to where he ultimately went. Now, this experimentation, I don't 100% agree with the way that they're using experimentation here, because there are kind of two ways, and two ways are kind of separate. An experiment can be a test, like in the Radiohead example. The Radiohead example, where Radiohead being the rock band, and they decided to put their latest album on their website, and you could pay whatever you wanted to pay, or nothing. And a third of them people chose to pay nothing, but 2/3 of them paid an average of £4, and that £4 was almost double what they got the normal way. And then once they took this limited release, 60 days they had it on the site. And they decided to sell it in the normal way, and people said, well, no one's going to buy it because everyone who's already wanted it has downloaded it. Well, that was proven wrong, because the CD debuted at #1 both in the U.S. and the U.K. and sold an additional 1.7 million CDs through commercial channels over the next 21 months, which was 5 or 6 times more than Radiohead's previous CDs. So that was tremendous. But that's a test. There's a difference between a test as an experiment and the experimentation method, which is a trial and error. So both of these things happen when we're looking at business models. There's, okay, we've developed a business model and we think it's going to work, and we test it. We might have to tweak it a little bit, okay, which is different than let's put out a method and then play trial and error, tweaking it all the way. There's a little difference there. It might be subtle, but I think it's important, because what you get through this article is that you can't that all business models are a result that emerge. Okay, and you get that also out of one of the other articles here. You get it out of the Mason and Spring article, Site and Practice of Business Models. When you go back to that lecture, you'll see that as well, that they think that all business models emerge, and you can't say, okay, create a business model a priori up front. Okay, and I don't believe that's true. Okay, so what are some of the barriers to business model innovation? Okay. One is that you may have a major difference with the firm's traditional way of doing business, and that is a significant barrier. Okay. Second, disruptive technologies. Okay, disruptive technologies, and this is again getting back to what Clayton Christensen became famous for, and basically what it's talking about is that the incumbent technologies inhibit a firm's ability to experiment with their business model, or even see that the business model is an issue. Cognitive barriers. Now, this is what Cheeseborough and his researching partner Richard Rosenblum, came up with, that there are cognitive or ways of thinking that impact your ability to innovate your business model. Is that there's this dominant logic or way of doing things in an organization, and that can be a powerful inhibitor to changing your business model. And they come up that the right business model, okay, is far from clear. Okay, that in some of these business model researchers believe that you know what the right business model is, and you just have to work towards it. And what he's saying is that there is no necessarily right business model, or if there is, we don't know what it is, and that we need to experiment until we kind of find it. Now, this article is one that started talking about Osterwalder a little bit, but it included Osterwalder as part of two mapping techniques. They called them mapping techniques, were approaches that allowed one to map in a physical artifact your potential business model. And he was referring to the dissertation, of course, of Osterwalder, because the book had not come out as of yet. So the dissertation was in 2004, but the book didn't come out until a number of years later, about 6 years later, in fact. And also talked about IBM's component business model, which is another mapping technique. Another mapping technique. Again, this was these mapping techniques were the first time where you could draw the model in a kind of overview sort of way to get an understanding of the, let's say, integrating and moving parts of the model. Then they talk about different paths to alternative business models. And the first one is experimentation. Okay, experimentation. The second is effectuation. And the third is organizational leadership. And I'm going to go into a little bit more depth in a second here. So experimentation, it's trying alternative business models. Okay, and the best way to do it, if you can try alternative business models on real customers using real money, that of course is going to give you the best test result. You can run simulations and do all sorts of things, but real customers, real money, that's the best test you can do. And further, it's important when you do these experiments that you keep an eye on costs. And there are a number of costs that you need to keep your eye on. Direct costs, okay, the cost of failure, and time. Time is a cost as well. Effectuation. Effectuation is a nice $100 word there. But what he's talking about in terms of effectuation is that when you're creating your business model or doing anything interacting with the marketplace, there may be a lack of information. You know, so classic theory might tell you that you need to do market research and you need to talk to customers, you need to do all these sorts of things, but you might not be able to do that because there might not be information out there. And action creates new information. So when you actually engage with the market, that results in new information. And effectuation is the kind of the process of enacting, where you actually create the situation. Okay. And this effectuation, this acting, this creating, is important for reframing the dominant logic of past business models, because past business models are going to be based on experience and market research, and there might not be information for you. So you have to go out and act to create the information to come back to say, okay, we need to change the way we're doing things. We need to think a little bit differently. And using these tools, both the IBM component business model and the business model canvas, can help in describing what's going on in the environment that you're helping create. And finally, it's organizational leadership. Again, this wasn't the first article to talk about it, but who's responsible for doing all of this stuff? Okay, and in most organizations, there is no single person responsible. So then it goes to the CEO, who has overall responsibility for everything. Okay, but the CEO can't be responsible. Well, ultimately is responsible for everything, but he can't be involved in everything. In addition, the CEO has been brought up or is steeped in the old system, the old model. So he or she has a vested interest on how things were. He or she may be so biased, not necessarily in a bad way, but so biased that they cannot see outside the box that they're in. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is going to require shifting of resources, and that might change the organizational balance, and that might cause people to clamp down and not be as open because they may be losing resources, and people are often compensated by the amount of resources they control. So it might require a special organizational culture, in fact, in order to change your business model. Change your business model. Now, also keep in mind that in the, let's say, olden days, prior to the last 5 or 6 years, most companies really weren't focusing on large companies really weren't focusing on their business model. So I think that as new companies are created today, there is so much emphasis on business models that organizational change in terms of business model change down the road is going to be easier than it is now, because people will have that in mind and companies will have been built with this in mind. Okay, that is the end of that. I hope that was valuable for you, and we'll come back in a second.